Yo, what is going on, everybody? Welcome to the Awesemo NFL Strategy Show, Showdown Edition, baby. Sponsored by No House Advantage. I'm Dave Lochran at Lofty_D on Twitter. Hit your boy up, and while you're there, go say hi to the fella, the man. I like to consider this guy a jack of all trades as well, whether it be college, whether it be the NFL, whether it be betting. Matt Gajeski at Matt_Gajeski. You took a bit of a respite yesterday, Matt, coming back from a wedding, right, in northern Wisconsin. But we're here to talk about the Colts, the Ravens, Monday Night Football to close out Week 5. What's up, bro?
Not much. Happy to be here. Excited for tonight's game. Hopefully we don't have any more injuries. I didn't catch a lot of football yesterday as I was traveling back from, first of all, like whoever schedules their weddings in the fall, no forgiveness for you, but missed a lot of the, yeah, man, I don't know. Missed a lot of the Week 5 games, but as I'm driving back, I keep getting Schefter notifications like so-and-so is hurt. So-and-so is out for the game. Joe Burrow has a throat contusion going to the hospital. Like, I don't know. It seemed like half the league got hurt yesterday.
It was bad. By the way, I walked outside for a second for the show, and I'm pretty sure I walked into a cobweb. So now it's just one of those things where it's you know what I mean? You just feel it all over your face. It's awful. Yeah. It's awful. But yeah, dude, yesterday was crazy with injuries. The New York Giants, and by the way, I had a wedding last Sunday as well. I had a Sunday wedding, a lot of fun. I mean, got tuned up and it was all worth it. But Sunday weddings are preposterous, especially given that the dude who scheduled this is my neighbor, a good friend of mine, huge football fan, big DFS guy, big bettor. But you know, you take advantage of what you got, and it was still nice. But man, the New York Giants, they're down at this point, like assuming everyone's out for the next week. Shepard, Slayton, Barkley, Galladay, Tony, I don't think is going to get suspended, but he tried a closed fist punch in somebody's helmet, which is like, all right, pal, good job. Who else? Someone else got hurt too.
Daniel Jones.
Sorry. Yeah. Daniel Jones wobbled himself off the field. I mean, my God, the amount of injuries that we saw for the New York Giants, they stood no chance. And then when you've got Sir Longneck coming in as your backup in New York, things aren't going to play out for you well. It was a crazy day. And then what about the Chiefs, Matt? Like Clyde Edwards-Helaire went down with a knee. Tyreek Hill was dealing with a knee injury. I think Travis Kelce got banged up. They lost Tooney. Well, actually they didn't. He broke his wrist or arm and came back after the first series. They got beat up, not just by injuries, but smoked at home 38-20 by the Bills.
Yeah, I did catch that game by the time I got home. Pretty surprised. And the Bills, I mean, they just had no issues moving the ball. And it really early in the game, they were doing it a lot with like tight ends and running backs. And I know the Chiefs had been struggling on defense, but that was a lot worse than I expected.
Jordan, change that to Week 5 review for me. I think I may have just forgot to change that when I was doing the run sheet. Thank you, Carl. Appreciate that. Yeah, Week 5 review. This is Monday, the 11th of October, in case you were confused. But all in all, man, from yesterday, an insane amount of injuries, some games that went a lot different than people expected. The Eagles got a win over Carolina after being down by 2 possessions and looking awful in the first half. Kansas City Chiefs looked, I mean, terror. Is it a realistic possibility now that in that division they don't make the playoffs?
It is. That division's really strong. It's funny, both the West divisions, I think, are the 2 strongest in football. But Las Vegas, I mean, they looked like they took a step back yesterday, kind of what we expected early in the year. Anytime you lose to the Bears, like you can't. And the Las Vegas, they played a ton of really close games early in the year. They had that overtime win. So perhaps they can still limp their way past the Raiders. I mean, Denver, they're really strong on defense, and I think they're going to be competitive. They're just still a little bit hamstrung by their offense and some of the injuries they have. If you can find like good lines on futures that the Chiefs are maybe, I don't know, just not like minus 200 to make the playoffs, I'd still probably take that, but it's getting a little bit more tenuous, especially with the Chargers being as good as they are.
You want to know what the Chiefs are on DraftKings to make the playoffs still?
What is it?
Minus 400.
Okay, I wouldn't bet that.
No. And again, it has a lot to do too with the fact that now you got 7 teams from each conference. You got almost half the teams making the the playoffs. So it's a little bit different. If it was only 6 teams, that'd be different. But the Chargers are actually favored against the field in their division to make to win their division at plus 125, Chiefs at plus 150. But as it stands, Matt, like the Broncos aren't a bad team, but they benefited greatly from the first 3 matchups that they faced early in the season. They just dropped one to the Steelers. They've now lost 2 straight games, got blown out by Baltimore. And like you said, the Raiders might be coming back down to earth here. So I don't know about you, but it feels like a 2-horse race in the division. Whereas if that's the case, the Chiefs still have a very good opportunity to make the postseason.
Yeah, I agree. And I still do think the NFC West is the best division in football. And that division is going to cannibalize itself. And even yesterday, it was kind of the Arizona game, the 49er game. That was one I really had my eye on. Surprised to see it as low scoring, but I think the 49ers predictably took some lumps with Trey Lance as the starter for the first time. Was a little surprised to see Arizona only put up 17 points there. But that division, I mean, I don't know who's going to win it, but that is a really strong division.
Yeah, absolutely an insane division, and that'll be fun to watch. All right, let's dive into this. We've got one game. Colts getting 7.5 points against the Ravens on Monday Night Football. But first, hit that thumbs up. Happy Monday to everybody. Let's start the work week off in a nice way here. Hammer that thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so yet. Well on our way to 70,000 subs, continuing to produce what hopefully you guys believe is the best free DFS content out there on the YouTube. So yeah, only takes a second. And if you hate us, you never have to come back. But I think if you subscribe and hit that thumbs up, you'll be happy to be here with us for the long haul. All right, Matt, 7.5 point dogs. You can get 7 in some spots. You and I talked about it before the show. Not really a good lean on betting sides here. If I could have got Baltimore at 6.5, I probably would have laid the points, but I'm a little trepidation going either way here. But hey, the Indianapolis Colts offense has sputtered on many occasions this season. They cleaned up against Miami last week, but the Dolphins just look like a really rough football team right now. Coughed up 5 touchdown passes to Tom Brady yesterday. Against Tennessee, the Colts fell 16-25, lost to the Rams, lost to the Seahawks. So sure, some relatively difficult matchups to start the year, but it's not going to get any easier tonight in Baltimore against the Ravens and Lamar Jackson.
No, it's not. And they're a team, again, that's really banged up. And it's not as much their skill position players, but I think the strength of their team, the offensive line heading into the year, has been just completely and utterly decimated. We're talking about major injuries to players like Quentin Nelson, like Braden Smith's not going to play in this game. There's a lot of questions I have for this Indianapolis team, and I think they've already appeared this year. Not to mention Carson Wentz, he's been banged up for essentially the entire season, going back to the preseason. So it's just a really tough spot for the Colts. And like you said, my first instinct was to lay the points with the Ravens. I've done this in a lot of spots this year, including against the Raiders, and it hasn't paid off. So just a little hesitant on that.
All right. So let's actually start with the run game here, because it's something before we jump into the room here about like 10, 15 minutes early, and we'll discuss a bunch of things, where we're at, how the week went, personal stuff, not really, but football stuff. And one thing we came across, Matt, was Jonathan Taylor, and just to use his prop here to give you an idea of where it stands in Vegas. What was it? 56.5 yards. I think minus 115 to the over.
Yep.
Right. It seems very beatable here. The question is really, can this remain a neutral game script? And it was funny because you mentioned the Baltimore Ravens have been one of those teams that you've had a tough time gauging this year, in the sense of like they'll lay 7 points, 8, 6 points, and have a tough time covering those. We've seen it on multiple occasions already. Is it possible that we get a game script? And when I say possible, of course it's possible, but what is the likelihood, in your opinion, that a game script plays out where Jonathan Taylor is getting, a large helping of targets in that backfield, and they look to lean on the run here instead of on Carson Wentz's arm?
I think that should be the approach they try to take. And I think even if they're down a little bit in the game, they still try to take that approach. I think the game would have to get out of hand for Jonathan Taylor to be completely phased out of the game, which is possible. I mean, it's a 7.5 point spread here. And the Colts, they're now using 3 backs. And I think some of the Marlon Mack noise was just because they They only won the Dolphins game by 10 points, but it was pretty much in control the whole time. So they could spell Jonathan Taylor a little more than normal. My first instinct on that prop was to look at the over again, because there's a lot of ways he can hit it with efficiency. If they're in a competitive game script, Jonathan Taylor should see a full workload. But overall, the backfield's really tough to decipher on both sides here because of the usage of multiple backs.
And in the game script adjusted rush percentage tool over at Awesemo, I think you'll like this. They're 14th in game script adjusted rush percentage. So it's not like they're just abandoning the run, right? They're in the top half of the league in that category. That isn't to say that, this game, they're not just going to start passing a lot and lean on Nyheim Hines, who in many aspects has kind of been an extension to the run. But Jonathan Taylor coming off that 16 attempt game, 103 yards and a score. And one thing that you and I have talked about a lot, we'll see how long it holds up for and how long this continues to happen. But man, Jonathan Taylor, just from an opportunity standpoint, is still leading the league in goal line carries, and he hasn't even played week 5 yet. He has 7 goal line carries and 0 touchdowns inside the 5-yard line. Of course, he did score last week, but this is big. Like, we're seeing that if they are going to produce, if they are going to be able to move the football, if they can get it down to the 10, to the goal line, because he has 10 carries inside the 10, 19 carries in the red zone. If they can get it there, he is going to get that work.
They've just run the ball so much in the red zone. Looking back to last week alone, and it's not like Taylor's seeing 100% of these carries, but in the red zone, Taylor 6 carries, Marlon Mack 2, Carson Wentz 3, Nyheim Hines 2. They're a team that just runs the ball a lot in the red zone. So obviously that's going to benefit Jonathan Taylor. And when they're on the goal line, which you mentioned, he's the back they'll use. They're not going to give Nyheim Hines a significant share of pure goal line opportunities. So there is a lot of scoring equity with Jonathan Taylor. And I mean, this game overall has a pretty high total, 46. It's not as high as some of the other games we've seen so far too, but we're still expecting points to be scored on both sides. So I think with that role, Jonathan Taylor does have a path to a ceiling.
Is there any merit to captaining Jonathan Taylor today? Because that's where I think it might get a little sketchy.
I think you can. He's not coming in with egregious ownership there. It's about 6%. And like we mentioned, there's a path to a ceiling. So I think you always have to consider, does this player actually have the ability to take down a tournament if they have a ceiling performance? And I think Taylor still does. It likely comes from multiple touchdowns and the Colts being ahead in the game. Not the most likely scenario, but again, that's reflected in ownership. He's 6% in the captain. I think you could definitely take some shots on that and get some leverage.
Where do you go on somebody like Nyheim Hines, who, as you mentioned, has seen, limited, but some opportunities in the red zone? I believe he actually had a 9-yard touchdown just a couple of weeks ago. He's been targeted erratically, 8, 2, 6, and 2, which is, I think also a product of what these game flows or game scripts are looking like. And his workload on the ground has been, again, also pretty erratic, 9, 1, 6, and 2. What do you make of somebody like him when you look at his workload and then you look at his snap counts, which have kind of also been all over the place, Matt?
Yeah, I think in a lot of ways they reflect game script. In games where they're competitive or down, he will play a little bit more. Games that are competitive to a little more out of hand with him playing from ahead, you'll see Jonathan Taylor and Marlon Mack. So I think the ebbs and flows are somewhat predictable. With Nyheim Hines, I do not think there's as much of a ceiling as Jonathan Taylor because of situations like the goal line. And if you get a Nyheim Hines game where he's playing a lot, it means the Colts have probably struggled to some degree in that game. And now he's on the field trying to catch passes, playing from behind. With that said, I think he's fine in like cash game builds because of the floor he gives you in those scenarios, but just the limited upside. Don't really see him ever taking down multiple touchdowns unless it's some sort of crazy, like long runs, weird situations that aren't as likely to happen.
The only thing I'd say too, though, is that it feels like Nyheim Hines' price point is at least reasonable, right? He's not, I wouldn't say he's overpriced. I wouldn't say he's underpriced either, but I do think 5,600, if you're working him into some lineups there, it's not the craziest idea, but I'm with you. The upside doesn't feel like it's there. And hey, he has 18 targets on the season. He's run 73 routes. Jonathan Taylor has 12 targets. He's run 55 routes. So clearly it's not up to par with what Nyheim Hines is doing, but it's not like he's miles behind him either.
Right. We talked about this before. That's more of like a game script thing where it's pure play from behind, hurry up stuff where Nyheim Hines is on the field. But all of these offenses now are basically coming onto the field with multiple plays called. If it's supposed to be a run play and Carson Wentz checks out of it into a pass, like Jonathan Taylor is going to see his fair share amount of targets too. It's not this clear 1-for-1 situation in today's NFL. If you're on the field, you're probably going to see some looks.
How opposed are you to having Taylor and Hines in some same large field tournament lineups?
That's exactly it. It has to be large field tournament because they're the underdog and a pretty significant underdog. I would rather not do that for this team. I would like to do it with maybe the Ravens on the other side, which we'll talk about their backfield in a little bit. But in large field tournaments, the reason I would take stabs on both players in the same lineup is just the leverage it'll give you, and you'll be more unique. Not very many people likely are going to take that stand.
All right. So the passing game, Carson Wentz, Michael Pittman, and then it's just, it gets ugly after that. Like a lot of people projected Paris Campbell for an expanded role this year. Hey, Carson Wentz loves to target his slot receivers. This could be the season. Paris Campbell has been, for all intents and purposes, just a non-factor in this offense. Meanwhile, guys like Zach Pascal have seen 5, 6, 7, and 5 targets in his 4 games. And Michael Pittman is the clear number 1 option in this passing game. And I tell you what, Matt, I don't see any reason he shouldn't be this guy. And I know you and I agree on this. We talked about it all offseason. Like he has true alpha ability in terms of just pedigree and the archetype of a receiver that he is.
Yeah, he's a stud and he's been fantastic. I think it's kind of surprising that him and Zach Pascal are so close in price on DraftKings. If I have the money, I'm just going to try to find the $800 to get to Pittman because he has functioned as the true alpha. And no slight to Zach Pascal. I think he's outperformed expectation. He's played very well this year, and he is very clearly the wide receiver too. He is far and away ahead of Paris Campbell right now in the offense. But if I just have to pick between the studs, it doesn't seem like much of a decision with the price being so close. Give me Pittman all day.
It's crazy too, because just from an overall fantasy points per game standpoint, he hasn't been great. I kind of just exclude week 1 altogether because weeks 2 through 4, he's been dominant, 30% target share. That's exactly what you want to see, right? But he still hasn't scored yet, Matt. And how much does that factor into your analysis here, knowing that they are a run-heavy team, knowing that he hasn't gotten in the end zone yet, but also knowing that Michael Pittman is that type of big body receiver that can absolutely produce if he's targeted in the end zone or in the red zone. And he has, here's an interesting point. I'd love to hear you talk on this. So he has 6 red zone targets. That's second on the team. Zach Pascal has 9 and 7 inside the 10 and a pair of them inside the 2. But Pittman still has 5 targets inside of the 10 as well. So these two guys are basically monopolizing all of the passing attempts or targets inside of the 10-yard line. There have been 14 targets inside the 10. They've combined for 12 of them.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of reasons you would have Michael Pittman with no touchdowns at this point. One, we're only 4 weeks into the year, so really small sample to begin with. 2, it's a bad team. Like the Colts, they're just not going to score as many points as some other teams in the NFL anyway. 3, their red zone run rate's really high. They have Jonathan Taylor, which I think it makes sense to ride him in the red zone, especially when you're on the goal line situations like that. As far as Zach Pascal versus like Michael Pittman, Pascal has been used in the red zone quite a bit. I always struggled to like anoint a wide receiver like the red zone guy. Right. Last year, Pascal did lead the team with 13 red zone targets, but he was only slightly above Pittman anyway. So these guys seem pretty close to me. And it's not a situation where I think, all right, we get in the red zone, we got to target Zach Pascal. Like he's the guy that succeeds in these areas. I think it's just a little noisy at this point in the year.
Yeah, I'm with you. Plus, it's not like Pittman hasn't been targeted in the red zone, like he has. And he played 3 fewer games than Zach Pascal last season as well. Only 13 games as a rookie for Pittman. I think we're going to begin to see that change a little bit. Now, here's where it gets ugly, right? Because we both agree Pittman is a strong play. And you know what? I'm generally not someone that's very big on targeting Pascal, but if we're talking about a showdown slate, he does have pretty decent touchdown equity. And if he's going to get those looks inside the 5, inside the 10, I like him too. It's just a matter of who you like more. And I think Pittman, from a PPR standpoint and just from an overall volume standpoint, is better than Zach Pascal. But I like the touchdown upside with the latter as well. So both of those guys are in play. Once you get past that, though, Matt, where do you turn? Feel free to talk about tight ends as well, but it gets ugly pretty quick.
Yeah, tight ends are a huge discussion for Indianapolis because they play 12 personnel at such a high rate. And unfortunately, it's not just like 2 tight ends like the Eagles or something that are going to be on the field. They're, of course, going to use Mo Alley Cox. He's been their leader. They use Jack Doyle, who's kind of just been a reliable veteran for them. And then they use their rookie, Kylan Granson. So they're using 3 tight ends. And I think just based on price, Mo Alley Cox is somebody you have to at least consider. He's slightly more expensive than Campbell. I think that makes sense. Mo Alley Cox is actually playing a lot more than Paris Campbell, who is, you'd call him the wide receiver 3, but the 12 personnel rate for Indianapolis kind of renders him a very timeshare player, a real boom bust guy. And once you get past Campbell, I think instead of playing him, I would rather take a shot on one of these cheaper tight ends like a Doyle or even a Kylan Granson, who is just super cheap at the stone minimum. There's another stone minimum player we'll talk about, but Granson down there, his role in the offense is significant enough to take a look. Like last week, he played on 42% of the snaps, which is pretty high for a player who's at the stone minimum. And we haven't seen him targeted a ton yet this year. Again, he's just a timeshare player. But again, on the field, just as much as Paris Campbell. Doesn't make a lot of sense in my opinion, that their prices would be so different.
For sure. Yeah, Mo Alley Cox and Doyle both have 3 red zone targets each this season. If you had to pick between one of them, is there any preference?
It would be Mo Alley Cox, just on the field more, running more routes. Again, targets aren't, they're not, just with the timeshare, I don't think they're ever going to be drastically different between these players. But I do think there is an edge towards Mo Alley Cox.
Okay. Anybody else for this Colts team? Kicker, defense, any other kind of tertiary options that no one's talking about?
For kickers and defense, I'm more likely to play them in situations like this. 46-point total overall. So kickers, there's just a better chance that their scoring is among the leaders. Again, kickers mainly going to be in play for cash games, low risk contests. If the game shoots out or something, there's a chance that they're just left out of the optimal lineup because of scoring. But in these low game environments where like maybe there's a lot of turnovers, some defensive scores, special team scores, that's where you can take advantage by playing defenses and kickers. And we have a situation like that tonight. On the Colts side, as a 7.5-point underdog, I would rather do this with the Ravens and leave the Colts for large field contest. But again, they still need to be considered.
All right. Well, I think we covered everything for the Colts right now. We got 222 watching and get up to 50 likes if we could. We're at 44 right now. That's a small ask for sure. We're 6 away, and hit that subscribe while you're at it. Preacher Son says, hey, Matt Laffy, what's good? Have you heard that Bateman might come back tonight? Yes, as a matter of fact, we are going to talk about that in just a second. But first, you guys have heard about No House Advantage, I'm sure. And if you haven't, you should definitely be checking it out because, well, it's all in the name, right? There's no MME, there's no MME optimizer sharks, none of that stuff. And you're playing against peer-to-peer 100% prop. I shouldn't say bets, right? I should say 100% peer-to-peer prop. What, I don't even know. How do I even phrase that, Matt? Prop, not betting, prop, player prop games.
Yeah.
I don't know. But
Contests.
100 or 500 player props offered. It's the largest amount out there that you're going to find with these type of sites. So if you haven't checked it out yet, there's a few reasons to do so. And usually I would tell you that the deposit bonus is the number one reason to do so. There is a deposit bonus. Awesemo, AWESEMO, gets you $25 when you sign up and deposit using the promo code Awesemo. But that's not, surprisingly, that's not the main reason to sign up here, which, you know, your ears should perk up when you hear that. Because, Matt, did you know that all of the tools that you would use to win and create an edge over at No House Advantage are free at awesemo.com? Did you know that?
I did not know that. What a steal, though.
I think you did know that, but I was solid. No House Advantage player prop tool, totally free every day of the week at awesemo.com. The No House Advantage optimal lineups tool, totally free over at awesemo.com. And you got these bad boys built by Awesemo himself, Alex Baker, #1 ranked player out there. So you know they're legit. I mean, it's a good site to play on. You can go to nohouseadvantage.com. You can download it in the App Store or the Google Play Store, whichever one you want. But the biggest thing too, and not even the free tools, not the promo code. The biggest thing is, and our boy Ben Rasa mentions this all the time, the props are static. So while you have these other sites and of course books that are changing the props throughout the day, as things change, as news comes in, as money comes in on them, none of that happens at No House Advantage. No, naturally you'd say, yeah, but I mean, everyone's going to know about that. Wrong. Just not true. So many people miss out on that. Find the edge where you can. That is one perfect way to do it. Check other books, see where the discrepancies are, and jump on that. What you do at No House Advantage is you're building lineups with player props. 8-player lineups. The ones you like the most go at the top. They get the most points. The ones you're least confident in go at the bottom, get the fewest points. So you're building lineup, but with props, not salary. It's awesome. Check it out. Use the tools. Take advantage of those static props and use the promo code Awesemo to get up to $25 when you sign up and deposit for the first time. All right, Matt, let's talk about the Baltimore Ravens here.
All right, let's do it.
The player, okay, so the Awesemo, and I love this tool, the Showdown top plays tool over at Awesemo. It's not just top plays like who we think are the top plays. You're running simulations to get who is going to be the top overall score on the day, probability of that, the optimal captain, optimal lineup, all of that good stuff. Right now, Lamar Jackson's top play probability, so the likelihood that he is the #1 scoring player on the slate, is 60%. The next closest player is Carson Wentz at 8%. I can't remember the last time I've seen a discrepancy like that on a Showdown slate.
We were talking about this before the show. I really do not think we have. And it raises an interesting question for Showdown contest. Lamar Jackson's going to be extremely owned, but is he even owned to the point where it's efficient, or should you just be taking like a stance and playing him 100% of the time?
That's the thing. And John and Sterling, sorry, fellas, you got to pay the bills, boys. Do you play him on? I mean, his ownership is already coming in around 90%, but his leverage score is still positive. That's crazy. Go ahead.
Yeah, looking between the captain slot ownership and the utility ownership, he's about 35% in the captain. And if our tools are correct, and I of course trust our tools, he should be played in the captain spot more often than the 35% he's coming in with our projected ownership. You'll have leverage just by playing him in that spot. And I think it makes sense. He has an immense price tag. People still want to play Lamar Jackson, but they want their lineups to look better. So it looks like more people than not are going to be playing him in the utility. And just by putting him in that captain spot, I think you can gain some leverage.
All right. Well, Rashad Bateman expected to return, activated from the IR. He hurt himself running a route in practice. I mean, the guy was the 27th overall pick, Matt. So they drafted a first rounder, just knowing well and good that Marquise Brown was not going to be a guy that against tough playoff teams with good defenses and even better offenses is going to carry you to the promised land. But it looks like we have a very good chance that Bateman not only is active, but is also on the field. And if that's the case, it feels like a mispricing by DraftKings, right? I mean, if he's out there, how much do you need from this guy to get where you need to go? He is the stone min on DraftKings, bare minimum $200 tonight, coming off the IR, but first round pick. Maybe they plan to use him.
I think they plan to use him. It's just how much is the question. And Baltimore is going to be a really difficult team just because of the way they're on the field and they're using their player personnel. They run more 2 running back sets than any other team in football. And that's not because they're using like Le'Veon Bell and Latavius Murray at the same time. They use their fullback, Patrick Ricard. Like last week, Ricard played on 70% of the snaps. He hasn't played on fewer than 50% in any game this year. And his average is above 60%. And perhaps with Bateman back, that drops a little bit. Maybe they embrace the pass more. Not something they've done historically, but it's possible. So with Bateman, you have to have him not only maybe on the field having the Ravens run more 11 personnel, but when they're not in 11 personnel, he then needs to play ahead of guys like Sammy Watkins. He needs to play ahead of maybe Marquise Brown. And that just seems a little unlikely to me. So if I'm trying to predict Rashad Bateman first day back, it's probably not going to be anywhere near a full-time workload. The only benefit to playing him in your lineup is he's the stone minimum, and he's the avenue to maybe that Lamar Jackson captain. And if he gets a catch or two, that'll be enough where it still pays off. But there's a lot of concerns with Bateman heading into the game.
I'm with you. However, I'll say this. We've seen teams utilize players in that they don't put them on the field a lot, but when they're on the field, they get a lot of opportunity. Cordero Patterson being an example. Of course, this is not apples to apples. And with Calvin Ridley out, Patterson played a lot more. But through the first 4 weeks, Matt, Patterson was averaging like 30% of snaps, but he was being targeted on like every other route that he ran. I'm not even kidding.
Yeah, for sure. And like Rondale Moore is a good example of this too.
Deshaun Jackson's another example of a guy that might play 15% of snaps and have 4 targets. So I'm not equating Bateman to all of them, but I do think they might say, all right, we got the shiny new toy that we just spent first round draft capital on. Marcus Brown's out here dropping touchdowns left and right. Sammy Watkins has 3 drops on the season as well, by the way. And maybe we look to get him involved. I don't think it's out of the question that Bateman plays 30% of snaps, but has 4 targets and maybe a couple that go downfield as well. So at 20%, you're right. At $200 at the bare min, there's no doubt a lot of risk here. But the way I see it is I'm willing to take some shots if it means I can get like some Lamar Jackson lineups with maybe Wentz and Pittman, and then mix in another decent player along the way. And we'll build a lineup in a few minutes too, and see if we can make something work with and without him.
Yeah, I like that approach. And I think if you're taking the stars and scrubs build to like cash games, Rashad Bateman's your guy. But I also like that there's pivots in this range. Like you could play Kylan Granson, who's also the stone minimum, who's likely going to have a similar snap share to Rashad Bateman. I mean, 42% of the snaps for Granson last week, 2 targets. I think median projections, you'd put Bateman around that. And just looking at our projections, Bateman doesn't project well at all. But again, he's the avenue that gets you the Lamar Jacksons and the better plays in the slate. So I think we're in agreement, but I think it's highly risky. In tournaments, I think you can get away from Bateman. You can change the build. You can play Granson. And in cash games, low risk contests, Bateman's probably the guy you go to just because of the security he offers. It's weird. Security for a $200 player, much different than like a Lamar Jackson security. But again, just the lineup overall looks a lot better.
What if his ownership ends up staying really low though? I mean, does that change your mind if he ends up garnering really low ownership here?
For sure. But 10%, there's no way that this stays true.
No, it's not even possible. I wouldn't mind though if DraftKings left that IR tag next to him.
That could suppress it.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm assuming it'll come off, but I looked this morning, I'm looking at it right now. I could refresh it too, but he's still got that IR label next to him. That can make a big difference here for sure. But no, there's no doubt people are going to look to go to him because it's going to open things up and everyone's trying to stack with studs in every slate. And with this one, it'll make it extremely easy to do so. So yeah, I'm with you. It's going to come up. What about then Marquise Brown and Mark Andrews and the rest of the guys and Sammy Watkins, those players that have been getting, quality snap shares. And while it's a low passing offense, and we knew that would be the case with Greg Roman, even after all of the running backs went down early in the year or before the year, they're still leaning on the run, and it's hard to blame them.
Yeah. And I think that will be the case as long as they're in competitive game environments. They just have such a dynamic player in Lamar Jackson. But among the pass catchers, Marquise Brown's price was a little perplexing to me. And I know he has that enormous ceiling, just that he can take the top off of defense at any time. But seeing him as expensive as he is, if you're just talking about the flex spot, he's only $1,600 cheaper than Lamar Jackson. And he's significantly more expensive than Mark Andrews, who has just slightly fewer targets than him on the year. So just picking between the two, Mark Andrews is the guy that's going to be that middling player that fills out your Ravens builds. And he doesn't have a ceiling that's too dissimilar from Marquise Brown. I think for that reason, in tournaments, you could maybe look to Brown, say he does catch the 1 or 2 long passes for touchdowns and has that ceiling. But overall, just low risk contest and price adjusted plays, like Mark Andrews is significantly better than Marquise Brown.
No doubt about it.
Like even Sammy Watkins has more targets than Marquise Brown. And I don't think that stays consistent, especially with Bateman back. But I mean, like Marquise Brown's price is ridiculous.
Brown has 28 to Watkins 26.
I'm seeing 29. I think this will depend on where you're getting information.
I was on PFF, and PFF generally throws away the ones where it's like in their vicinity, but not thrown to them. So.
Yeah. So I'm on Add More Funds. They have 29.
Okay.
But that's not the point. The point is like, they're so similar in.
You're right.
Even if you put Marquise Brown like 2 ahead of Watkins,
it doesn't matter.
You're
right. It's basically a 50.
Price.
Yeah, you're right. Marquise Brown, as you mentioned, the deep target. That's the one thing about Brown that stands out is the fact that this guy has 10 targets of 20 plus yards downfield this year. That's tied with only Cortland Sutton for the most in the league. And that says a lot because the Baltimore Ravens don't throw very often. Like Marquise Brown, and this is why in showdown large field tournaments, he's always valuable and he's expensive though. But like he has a 30, of all of his targets, Matt, 36% of them are deep balls. That's an absurd number for a guy that's getting targeted 7 times a game.
Yeah, that's a lot. And that partially explains his price. But if you just look at statistics like air yards, like Sammy Watkins is 4% behind Marquise Brown in air yards. Marquise Brown, 32%, Sammy Watkins, 28%. And I'm not trying to say play Sammy Watkins. This is entirely an argument that Marquise Brown's too expensive.
Yep. How does his one bad game come against the Lions?
Marquise Brown's?
Yeah. We know why.
He dropped some touchdowns, man. It's the bad game comes entirely down to that because he smoked some DBs. Like that part of his game was great.
He was open on every route he ran.
Again, it was playing the Lions, but
yeah. I don't know, man. What about Duvernay? Do you think he loses a lot of work to Bateman if Bateman plays like 30% of snaps?
When you said 30% of snaps, I thought that was probably like where I would project it myself. Duvernay.
Yeah, I'm just guessing, by the way, Matt. I'm just speculating. I thought 30% made,
Yeah, me too. That's literally the same number I was going to say.
Okay.
Duvernay, he's already a part-time player for a lot of the reasons we thought Marquise Brown might be risky. The Ravens using 2 backs. They use a fullback a lot. Sometimes they use 12 personnel, 2 tight ends. Duvernay is basically like a slot only receiver, and Bateman functioned in that role in his final year at Minnesota. So I do think that is going to be the player that comes off the field more than anyone else. But again, what I'm really worried about is 2 wide receiver sets. Does Bateman play over Sammy Watkins? Does Bateman play over Marquise Brown in certain situations? Brown and Bateman's skill set very different. But I mean, they're going to rotate players on and off the field. I think the biggest question is when does Bateman come on the field and for whom? I think he certainly plays ahead of Duvernay, and I'm really interested to see what happens in the 2 wide sets.
So the running back position's gotten interesting, right? Earlier it was Tyson Williams, who had a decent game. I think it was against Kansas City, but anybody has a decent game against Kansas City, right? And then now Latavius Murray. So Latavius Murray saw 18 attempts last game. I think it stands to reason that you could be seeing another heavy workload from Latavius Murray in this game. And granted, he wasn't effective last game in terms of, I should say he wasn't efficient last game. He did punch one in the end zone, but Denver's run defense is pretty good. But they committed to Latavius Murray, and he saw the large majority of running back carries. Should we expect that again today, Matt?
I think so. And it just comes down to he didn't really cause any mistakes. We saw Tyson Williams, even though he was somewhat efficient in the beginning of the year, have costly plays, have some mistakes and some mental errors. Latavius Murray didn't do that. So while maybe he wasn't, like the most efficient running back, he's somebody they can trust out there, and he does what he needs to and at least what's expected. So I don't think this would change. Maybe if they go into like severe negative game script, Le'Veon Bell would play more just because he's shown upside as a pass catcher. But I think for the time being, Latavius Murray should be the back we're looking at just because he's shown the ability to handle the offense and not make those costly plays.
Yeah. Listen, Murray played 62% of snaps last game, which you would agree for a guy that for a team that they don't really want to throw the foot on a team where they don't want to throw the football to running backs. Maybe he falls into a situation too, like you were saying, where it's possible that just because he's on the field, even though it's not designed, maybe he gets a couple of opportunities as a pass catcher as well. I don't know. I don't assume that'll be the case. He doesn't have a single target on the season, but that's what makes it even more interesting that he's been out there for 62% of snaps. And how much are you really worried about like Le'Veon Bell and Tyson Williams was inactive, coach's decision. So it's Devonta Freeman and Le'Veon Bell behind Latavius Murray.
Le'Veon played about a quarter of the snaps, a little bit more than that. The only real worry I have with Latavius Murray is that they do have a preference to Le'Veon Bell in negative game script when they're down in games.
Could be, yeah.
And that's just a worry. They haven't shown that yet. It's just potential speculation, and perhaps maybe gives Le'Veon some warrant as a cheaper punt play. He's not really that cheap, but somebody you could maybe use in like a contrarian situation. But that's really the only worry I have with Latavius Murray right now.
Yeah, with Bell, you'd hope for like 4 carries and maybe 3 or 4 targets, but targets in this, the problem when you're Baltimore and you're playing, and neither of us are projecting Baltimore to be playing from behind by any significant margin in this game, right? But the one issue with that is that where other teams dump it off on short passes to their running backs when they're playing from behind, Lamar Jackson can just run and pick up 3 times the yards.
For sure. And that's what they've done historically under Jackson. They target running backs among the lowest rate in the league year over year. So even in that game script, which you point out, maybe Le'Veon isn't the most involved anyway, just because of how they use Lamar Jackson on the ground. Is that extension of like the short pass game?
All right. So who haven't we hit on yet for Baltimore that you think needs some discussion?
I think we hit on most players. Like if you don't think Bateman comes in and plays a lot, like Devin Duvernay's role is still there. I don't think Devin Duvernay is ever going to have a ceiling as far as snap share. Like last week, 45% of the snaps for Duvernay. If you think Bateman just comes on the field for a couple plays here and there, maybe Devin Duvernay is worth a look in tournaments. James Prochet kind of is the same way, but I wouldn't expect much Prochet. Again, I think these are the 2 players that they kind of are the expense where Bateman's probably going to play a little bit more. They will use 2 tight ends at times, like Josh Oliver. When he's on the field, he's a pure pass catcher. I just don't think we see a ton of him. Again, 20% or 19% snap share last week. These are all just your big dart throws in tournaments, assuming they don't use Bateman a lot and they kind of continue on with what they've been doing.
I very seldom talk about kickers, but whenever you have Justin Tucker, you have to at least discuss it. Now, he's so good. He can hit him from anywhere. We know he hit a 66-yarder to win as time expired against Detroit. He has 11, 7, 17, and 13 fantasy points this year, which for a kicker is, crazy. But Matt, this guy is priced like a decent skill player. I mean, look at the salary on Justin Tucker. That does not make him. He's more expensive than a lot of. Where's he at? A 6. Okay. Actually, no. I'm sorry. My fault. I was at the captain spot. I had him at 6K. I was like, there's no way I would ever pay 6K for a kicker. Okay, that's a lot more palatable. 4K. He's actually not that expensive. Justin Tucker. What if this game is one of those slower paced, which is just lower scoring games that finishes with like 39 total points and Justin Tucker has 4 field goals?
Yeah, you'd love that. And I think in these low scoring game environments, you can play some kickers with more confidence. They're pretty easy plays in cash games, like any type of small field stuff, anything where you can just bank on his floor. And he certainly does have one. Not to mention Ravens touchdown favorites in this game. He just chips off a little bit of points every time they score, whether it's a field goal or he kicks the extra point. So Tucker, really good option for cash games, low risk contest. He was in my early cash build when I was running some optimals this morning. And for tournaments, I like kickers more in low scoring environments, which tonight looks like it's going to be a middling scoring environment to low scoring. So he's certainly there.
All right. Trying to see where these teams play in terms of pace. Baltimore's 22nd, Indy's 24th. Yeah, they play kind of slow. It's not like New Orleans pace, but they play pretty slow. I could see this just being one of those games where a kicker ends up being in the optimal and it's Justin Tucker. It wouldn't actually shock me at all. So, you could do worse. What about Baltimore's defense?
They have a lot of advantages. They're going up against a really banged up Colts offensive line, a Colts quarterback that's non-mobile, who's injured, playing through an injury, already turnover prone. They should be playing with a lead, at least according to bookmakers. All that bodes well for the Ravens. I still think they're going to come in under-owned. Defenses typically do, so you could get some leverage by playing them. I usually don't play a lot of defense captain, but if you're getting really weird and think maybe there's a score or just a really low scoring environment with a lot of turnovers, that could be something for large field tournaments too.
Okay. Let's build a lineup here. But I got a promo code for you if you guys wanted to check out awesemo.com. Awesemo plus platinum, everything on the site from football, baseball, basketball, hockey, MMA, PGA, NASCAR, esports, you name it. If they have contests out there, we got content for it. Premium content, ownership, player projections, top stack tool, boom bust tool, lineup builder, all of the Showdown content too. That should not go ignored. All of the Showdown content is included, like actual tools too, not just an article written up. But like we said, the top plays tool, the projections, the ownership. We even have tiers ownership and everything for that as well. Just across the board, no matter what format or sport you're trying to play, we got you covered. If you use the promo code NFL, is it NFL Showdown now? I thought it was NFL Strategy. Okay. NFL Showdown, all one word, all caps. That will get you 25% off your first week of Awesemo Plus Platinum. I mentioned it earlier about the No House Advantage tools, but all of these tools built and used by the #1 ranked player out there, Alex Baker, Awesemo himself, and maintained as well, and a lot of work put into them by guys like Steve Buzzard, the Colts, Millie Maker winner, Sean Zahn, some amazing DFS players that have made a lot of money playing these games with these tools. So I'd love to have you check them out. And if you do, hit us up in the premium Slack chat, good community, but also office hours where you've got those guys, the pros, taking your questions and helping you better your game. If you don't want to sign up yet, you're not in the position, that's cool too. Today's projection, or the top plays tool that Matt and I have been talking about, is totally free at Awesemo today, and the MLB top pitchers tool for these post-game slates. So NFL Showdown, all one word, all caps, 25% off your first week of Awesemo Plus Platinum. All right, Matt, let's build a lineup here. I'll let you go first in the captain spot. Large field tournament. We got to go Lamar?
We got to go Lamar.
All right. So then you pick the first flex because the captain was obviously, it was a foregone conclusion.
Let's go Mark Andrews.
Okay. Let's go Mark Andrews. So we got Lamar, we got Andrews. That now gives us around a little bit north of 6,100 per player to work with. We've got 4 to go. I'm going to throw Pittman in there. I think they'll need to throw a bit today. Pittman, just a very high target share, particularly over the last 3 weeks. I like it.
Okay, so that puts us around 5K left per player. I think if we take another stud, we might struggle to get somebody. Do you want to throw Wentz in there?
We can try it. We might end up with We might end up with Bateman, but we can try it.
I think we're going to.
All right, so if we go Wentz, then Bateman, we have 5,100. Is there any? Oh, Mo Alley Cox.
He's right there. And if you want to get really contrarian, you can leave salary on the table and play some risky players. But I think Mo Alley Cox fills out this lineup pretty well.
He does. I feel like this could obviously be a somewhat popular lineup, but yeah. All right. It pains me to ask you this, but does Paris Campbell in a lineup like this warrant consideration, just given that it's going to be so off the beaten path?
Yeah. This lineup in large field tournaments is probably duplicated because you have Bateman and Jackson. So if you want to get another approach and just save more salary and get leverage on ownership, Paris Campbell is somebody you could throw in there that gives 1,300 in salary remaining, which means people should not have this lineup as much and it will be less duped. I do think that's something you can do as well if you're playing something like a Millie Maker style tournament.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, or even like a Jack Doyle down there. If you play Jack Doyle, you're leaving 2,500 on the table, Matt, and people don't like to do that. So,
or I think like even in the same lineup we initially built, just go from Pittman to Pascal.
Yeah, that works too. What's the difference in ownership on those guys right now? Pittman, 37% and 31 in the utility. Zach Pascal is 22%, 20 in the utility. So yeah, let's quickly. I just want to see what this looks like. If we build a lineup without Jackson in the captain spot.
Okay, so I think we could do a couple things. If he does most of his damage through the air, you could see a pass catcher in the captain spot, especially if the touchdowns are concentrated to one player. Marquise Brown's going to give you a similar build in the captain spot because he's expensive. If we wanted to build something completely different, I think Andrews being at a different price point could be something to look at.
All right, let's try that. And by the way, thanks guys. Almost at 100 likes early on a Monday morning, getting the grind on early. So appreciate that. And subscribe too. That would be awesome. I think you'll like it here. All right. You want to go Andrews? You want to try Andrews in the captain spot?
Yeah, let's do it.
It's a pretty big discount. That's getting us a $9,000 discount from Jackson there.
Hey,
all right.
We should be able to get more studs now too.
No doubt. So I am definitely throwing Jackson in the utility still.
100%.
The hope here, Matt, is that Jackson has a nice game, but not a slate breaking game. And if that's the case, if Jackson goes for like 22, 25 and Andrews goes for even 20, right? That could put us where we need to be. So this type of build is not out of the realm. It's not out of the realm of possibility that this type of build can win at all.
I agree. And I still think we can take a similar approach to what we did in the previous lineup with some high equity Colts players. Like you could play Pittman and Wentz, and now you just have a lot more salary left over for your last two players.
Exactly. All right. So who do you want to go next? I went with Jackson. We got 4 left, about 6,900 per player remaining. Let's
take that same approach we did with the Pittman Wentz combo and see what we can do.
Okay. So you want to go Wentz and Pittman and then see what the remaining 2 look like?
Yeah.
All right. We got 4,150 per player remaining.
So I think you could do the stars and scrubs. You could play Bateman and one other expensive player, or you could take 2 middling options.
Let's try both.
Okay.
If you go Bateman and Jordan, I know we got to go, right? Do we have a show coming up right after this? Okay. So we're almost done. And thank you for getting us well over 100 likes, guys. If you go Bateman, you have 8,100 per player. That's tough because you have Latavius Murray. Sorry. You're 100 shy of Zach Pascal. And then the rest is just backup quarterbacks. So you could go like Nyheim Hines here. That's actually not the craziest idea. Now, I only say this, Matt, because you're leaving a lot on the table. You already have 2 pass catchers for Baltimore with Lamar Jackson. I don't want to play Latavius Murray there unless you think an onslaught makes sense.
I think in tournaments it does, but I like the Nyheim way you're going.
Right, because if you go Nyheim Hines, you're still leaving 2,500 on the table. You're already getting different by not having Lamar Jackson at captain. And in the event that they go up early, you have the Wentz to Pittman and then maybe an 8 or 9 target Hines game, which isn't exactly out of the question. I kind of like this lineup.
I like it too.
Okay, cool. Hey, do you have a bet or a prop that you like for tonight before we head out?
I think I'm going to end up taking the Ravens.
You're going to lay the points, yeah?
I think so.
All right. I like it. I'm going to go and you and I talk a lot about Pittman and a lot about, we talk a lot about like Jonathan Taylor. The more I look at this, the more worried I am about Jonathan Taylor's rushing prop, even though I think if things stay neutral, he gets there. But I'm going to go Pittman over 52.5 yards with the amount of targets this guy's been getting and the fact that they're touchdown dogs. I think they could struggle to develop a run game here over 52.5 for Pittman. That'll do it for us, guys. Thanks for hanging out as always. Like I said, free tools on the site today are the top plays for Showdown. It's an awesome tool. And of course the MLB top pitchers tool as well. We'll see you back here very soon. Follow Matt Gajeski at Matt_Gajeski on the Twitter right below his head. You see it in yellow. Me at Lafayette_D. And shout out to your boy Jordan Klein up early on the West Coast producing this show. We'll catch you back here for the next one. Peace.